The Education of OverSoul7 by Jane Roberts, read by Martin John. Chapter 18. Out of Body, Out of Mind, Lydia Takes a Journey. Sweet Young Thing was the patient's name for the newest nurse. She'd been there 3 days now. She handed Lydia her pill and said, "There, let's just open your mouth and swallow this, and we'll feel so much better." Lydia's thick tongue pushed out dutifully, and the cracked lips opened. But craftily, oh craftily, Lydia made swallowing motions while holding the pill in her cheek. When the nurse turned away, Lydia spit the pill out and waited. Old Cromwell, in the wheelchair next to her, leered his approval but kept silent. Tranquilized, Lydia had more trouble than usual concentrating, but she knew now that she could do what she wanted to, if she only tried hard enough. She'd been out, as she called it to herself, twice now. She mumbled irritably. She was bored rotten. To hell with it, she thought. She closed her eyes and imagined herself out of her body, standing right beside it. At first she made all kinds of mistakes, straining her physical muscles instead of using the particular inner tension that she'd discovered only the other day. A few times she swore under her breath. If her body moved too much, some troublemaker might come in and think she was trying to get out of the wheelchair. Then they'd add more restrainers, or strap her in tighter. "Out, out, out," she kept saying to herself. Old Lydia's talking to herself again, Sweet Young Thing said, passing by. Poor old Lydia. My foot, Lydia thought angrily, and in that moment she was out. In a snap, a real snap. She felt as if rubber bands went zinging too far, and then broke, and there she was. Oh God! Unbelievingly, she saw the really wild old bony body, the sly face with the eyelids closed, hiding such great secrets, her body in the silly robe and pink slippers, and that stupid little girl bow they put in her hair so condescendingly. And there the others were, all of them, in the stark room, the propped-up, half-empty bodies. The shock of seeing her body almost made her hysterical, but she caught herself at the sound of her first crazy chuckle. She didn't know how long she could stay out of her body yet, or what she could do. Could she, for example, just sneak away from it and not come back? And if she did, what would happen? "If you ain't the tricky one," a voice said. She swung around. Old Cromwell stood a good 3 feet off the floor, tipped sideways, grinning at her. Startled, frightened even, Lydia's eyes flew to his wheelchair. His body sat in it, as quiet as you please, fat and funny, in its flannel pajamas and feet stuck in mismatched socks. "Thought you were alone, and had it all to yourself, huh?" Cromwell asked. She gasped. He looked like an off-balance keepy doll, floating in the air like that. "Come down on the floor," she commanded. Lydia's composure returned. She certainly wasn't going to be intimidated by toothless Cromwell. "Come down this instant," she said. "Haven't got myself properly organized yet," he said. but I know more than you do. You're new at it. I've watched you. I can get out of this place, and you haven't figured that out yet." Lydia blinked up at him. "Out of what place?" Actually, she was almost disappointed. She felt so beautifully isolated before. Knowing Cromwell could leave his body, too, almost spoiled it all. "You just follow me and do what I do. It ain't going to hurt none," he said. "Isn't going to hurt any," she corrected automatically. A surge of dismay filled her. "Oh, Cromwell, why you?" she asked, half in amusement now and half in tears. "You want to waste all of your time yakking?" he demanded. No. You mean that we can get out of this infirmary?" Lydia was embarrassed at the urgency in her voice. Or was she actually talking? She touched her lips wonderingly. Yes, they were moving. Cromwell jumped up and down, watching her, holding his fat sides. "Sure, they work. Your lips work. Your arms work. Everything works." "You crazy old coot! Stop laughing at me," Lydia shouted. This only made Cromwell laugh louder. "Sorry," he said, "but you beat all. Here you are, finding me out of my body, too, and all you can do is correct my English and check to see if your lips are moving any. Never mind. Come on, follow me now." She tried, but she had difficulty navigating. She wanted to walk along the corridor with dignity, but she kept rising up in the air, bouncing up and down, and once she even floated sideways. They passed a sweet young thing in the hall. The sunlight through the window fell on her hair. So breathtaking was the light that for a moment Lydia forgot everything else. "Come on," Cromwell called, looking back. He went into one of the empty visiting rooms off the hall, walked over to the window, and went right through. There he was, bobbing up and down like a balloon, only in the air 3 stories above the ground. "I must be out of my mind, not out of my body," Lydia thought with a pang of panic. "They're right. I'm just senile, quite mad." The sight of Cromwell rolling out there enraged her. "What the hell is it now?" he asked, and impossibly he was beside her again. Lydia pulled herself up to some semblance of dignity. "Old men don't go strolling through the sky in the middle of the afternoon," she began. "Would you like it better if I was a young fella?" he said stiffly. "What's bugging you more? Looking funny? Making an ass of yourself? Or are you just plain scared?" She hurt his feelings. "I'm sorry, really I am. And I guess I'm scared. I just can't do it. Just step out like that through a window 3 stories up." "Okay, go back to your body," Cromwell said. "I thought you had some guts. They said you raised Cain right up to the last, but I guess that's all left you now. Be like some of them others if you want, afraid to get out even when they know they can. Besides being a crazy old coot, you're a cruel one," Lydia said. "And you're a stubborn old idiot," he said, grinning. She looked out, debating. Suppose she fell and died? Then the humor of it hit her. Everything was so outlandish that the word death didn't really mean much anymore. How could it when her body was all folded up by itself in the other room? while she was here. At her age, what the hell did she have to lose? Lydia almost gave Cromwell a coquettish smile. I might as well die trying to fly as any other way. It's better than being drugged to death, she said. Now, he shouted. He floated up several feet and just walked through the window. The glass seemed to part to let him through, though at any time Lydia expected to hear the whole thing crash into pieces. She kept her eyes on him, rose, approached the window, put her hands out, closed her eyes tight then, and went through. Hardly believing, she found herself looking down at the yard. Below sat other old people, in less advanced stages of senility, those still allowed outside privileges. How she used to envy them! "Cromwell, I'm doing it! I'm doing it!" she shouted. She felt free and weightless as the air itself. Already the two of them were moving away so that the building itself became a blur. Oh God, how I wish I were back at my desk, writing all this down, Lydia thought. And suddenly, with no transition that she could remember, there she was in her study. A notebook and pen were in front of her on the desk. She felt the wood, her fingers trembling. Was the desk real? It was. Wasn't it? It certainly seemed solid. But her furniture had been sold. She knew that. Yet each object in the room stood out with the most intense brilliance. Even the air itself seemed to shine. A bouquet of violets stood on the coffee table, her favorite flower. It was spring, then. It was. The scent of lilac came rushing to Lydia from the garden below. Then she looked down at herself, half terrified, half filled with exultation. Her body was a young woman's, hers, as a young woman. She was wearing a long-forgotten, lovely blue-flowered dress. What was happening to her? It was fall, not spring, or it had been. "I won't stand for this confusion," she said, suddenly furious. "I'm an old woman in a home for the aged," she added, sternly, determined to hold on to whatever reality was left. And she was. Lydia opened her eyes. She sat in the wheelchair. Her bones ached. Her hand was sore and clenched. She opened it. The tiny tranquilizer fell out and rolled to the floor. The nurse would find it. Desperately, she tried to reach it with her slipper so that she could shove it underneath her chair. As usual, when she tried to move her physical body correctly, her arms flopped like two scaly fishes, their mouths where her hands should be. Fascinated, she made her fingers move, or what felt like fingers, and watched the fishes' mouths open. A napkin lay there. If the fish swallowed the napkin, and if her hands were the fishes' mouths, would her arm digest the napkin? Marvelous, delightful. She could experience her hands as hands or as fish. Reality was slippery. But Lydia's eyes fell on the tranquilizer again, and she sobered. If they realized she hadn't taken it, they'd shove the next one down her throat. She'd seen it done to others, and had already resolved that she'd bite down hard if they ever tried it on her. Teeth and biting reminded her of near-toothless Cromwell, and the entire episode with him rushed back into her mind. She turned as far as the chair straps would allow to get a glimpse of his face. Two things happened then. almost but not quite at once. First, Sweet Young Thing's voice came from the hall. She was obviously approaching. Lydia's eyes flew to the pill again, where it lay out in plain sight. Next, Cromwell did something that she couldn't put her finger on. She just sensed the quickest, most eerie feeling of some kind of communication going on between him and Mariah, whose wheelchair wasn't strapped to the wall as theirs were. In almost the same instant, with nothing being said, Mariah wheeled out to the center of the room. The wheel of her chair went crunching over the tiny pill, smashing it into the smallest of pieces. La 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 la, sang Mariah, wheeling back and forth in the same spot, never looking down. Now the pill was white powder, scattered so thinly as to be invisible. La la la, went Mariah, with her tongue lolling. She looked over and gave Lydia a broad wink. Cromwell chuckled. Yes, chuckled quite sanely, Lydia realized. Then Mariah banged on the chair so that it made a defiant, satisfying thud. My, what a lovely song, Sweet Young Thing said, entering the room. Lydia's heart sank, but the nurse didn't even look at the floor. Mariah kept chanting, la la la, sounding quite like the senile old lady she was supposed to be. Sweet Young Thing said, now let's wheel you over to the window, out of the center of the floor, so other people can get by. There, I'll turn the television set on, so you can watch before supper. Then she left the room. Got lost, huh? Cromwell said. His words were slurred, as they usually were. He had the same old white bib tied about his neck in case he salivated too much and dribbled. His hands danced around each other as if they had a life of their own. Yet his eyes were crafty, amused, and in a strange way guileless. You got a bib on too, you know, he said, as if reading her thoughts. What? What? Lydia's voice was harsh. She could hardly hear what he was saying above the television program. When we was on our flying stroll, you just plinked out. You got carried away somewhere. The words ran together, but made sense. Hush, hush, she snapped. They'll hear you. She glanced quickly, fearfully, all around. Sometimes I think I'm batty, she cried. This sent Mariah and Cromwell into gales of laughter. Mariah wheeled herself up close to Lydia and screeched, Fly, fly like a bird! Tweet, 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 tweety! She waved her arms in the air and made a face, giggling all the while. Then, exhausted, she fell back in her chair. Sweet Young Thing came brustling in. Now let's not be so noisy. Who's making all the racket? This time there was a slight edge to her voice. Lydia watched her, thinking that she was young and sane at least, and could be depended upon. Nurse, she said, furious with herself. When she wanted most to speak, often she couldn't. Worse, the nurse didn't even hear her. She reached out, and this time the floppy right arm just lay there, refusing to move. But an arm reached out. Briefly, Lydia saw it, and felt it, and then it came back into her body and disappeared. She was nearly in a state of shock. Sweet Young Thing turned, saw her face, and said, What is it, Lydia? Are you trying to say something? What do you want? Lydia meant to say, "I know this sounds crazy, but I swear I went flying about this afternoon." Instead, all she got out in a raspy voice was, "People fly." "Of course they do," the nurse said cheerfully. Cromwell had a coughing spell. The nurse said, "What next?" and left to go get him water. Everyone in the room stared at Lydia. "Fear you not," Cromwell said, meaning to say, "Fear you not." "They don't know nothing," Mariah said. She grinned like a 3-year-old and rolled her eyes. For an instant Lydia rallied. "They don't know anything," she corrected. But when she tried to speak again, the words didn't make any sense. But her thoughts did. It came to her quite clearly that even while she couldn't speak properly, she could concentrate. And just as she was beginning to learn about these odd new movements in her inner body, she was aware more and more of an inner straining, as if words from outside were trying to form in her mind. In Chapter 18, Peace, Light, and Love. Aloha.